Hello and welcome back to the Brew Hoop podcast. I'm Adam Paris, co-managing editor of BrewHoop.com, joined as per usual on this joyous night by Kyle Carr and Riley Feldman. And I know we've been saying, I don't know if you could tell from the tone of our last podcast, but we seem to already be over the Detroit Pistons series even a week ago after one game. But officially, the series is done. The Bucks have shed the monkey from their back with a 127-104 victory over the Pistons, their first playoff series win since 2001. That's 18 years, fellas. And before we move on later in the podcast to talk a bit about Boston, I think it's important for us to reflect on how we're feeling after this victory. I mean, I know a lot of us were kind of saying, "Oh, it's a ho-hum series. Let's just kind of move on." But I found myself feeling a little more excited than I honestly thought I would after the victory. Riley, what were some of your first impressions right after the final buzzer sounded and the Bucks took this one?
I was actually going to ask if we were going to start off by going around the room here and saying what we were doing in 2001 when the Bucks last advanced. I was a fresh refugee from Illinois, just moved up to Wisconsin at the ripe old age of 5 or 6. But no, to the series in general, probably just ultimate vindication. Like the ultimate vindication will be depending on how deep they go into the playoffs. But the fact that they were able to trounce, a decent opponent without ever having to really adjust what they do. And even when guys had off nights, like Giannis has an off game in game 3 and you're still able to get through it, no problem at all. I guess excitement that you never really had to adjust or kind of show a new look that you might have to use later down the line. So I don't know, just happiness. And it's difficult when you have the largest margin of victory throughout a series sweep since I think I saw the mid 90s or something like that. So it's just tough because you don't want to be like, oh, it was ho hum after 18 years of futility, but it did kind of feel like that at the end of it, in my opinion.
Well, we can get a little misty-eyed and go back to where we were. Kyle, what about you? I know you obviously sent out and got some great responses on the BrewHoop Twitter account, but thinking about where you were in 2001 and where you are now with this series win, what's this sort of felt like to you?
For me, I was 9 years old when it happened. I remember going to every single Bucks playoff game because I had season tickets when I was younger. So just kind of watching that team, and I honestly thought they could win the whole thing, and you couldn't tell me otherwise. As a 9-year-old, I was full of hope. Fast forward 18 years, and now I'm a 27-year-old that is full of hope that they can win the whole thing. I think I'm a little bit more level-headed. Nah, actually, that's not true. That's a false statement.
Tune into last week's podcast if you want an example of Kyle not being level-headed.
But yeah, so it just feels good because I felt like this giant hurdle that the Bucks mentally had to get over, and every time there's some opposition of why the Bucks can't go on a run, someone would say, "Well, they haven't won a playoff series in 18 years," and it's like, yeah, but that was 18 years ago. None of those players, half of those players weren't around when that happened. These aren't the same old Bucks. And I think it just changed now that it's like you won that series. Now they can't say, well, they haven't won a series in X amount of time. Like that's a terrible cop up and it's no longer applicable. So I think it's just kind of like what you were saying, like vindication. But for me at the same time, it's just more kind of relief. Just it's like a relief and it feels like a nice weird weight off the shoulder in terms of being a fan, just because now you can actually know what it's like to advance and see how this team can react and see how far they can go. And it's one of those things where it kind of feels like now they can actually build on it and really take off running.
Yeah, I think I'm thinking back to how I felt basically after that first win when it really did feel just like another regular season game. Whereas where I felt tonight, I know back in '01, I mean, my family were Bucks fans, but we weren't like crazy season ticket holding Buck fans or whatever. We were south of Madison, so we didn't really make our way to Milwaukee. Really, the main thing I remember is like Glenn Robinson missing that like tiny runner on the baseline that would have been able to put them ahead. That's like the most distinct memory I have from that run. And then basically since then, I mean, it's just been futility. And I was watching it with my college buddy who lives in Philly with me, and I just think of like all of the crazy high playoff moments that we've even had just with Giannis so far. I mean, like the game 6 against the Bulls, it would have been absolutely improbable, and we lost by so much. But I'll admit it, I didn't get any work done that day. I was so excited for that game 6 just to think about the prospect of the Bucks being able to do some sort of amazing turnaround. I mean, obviously the Raptors series was amazing when they blew them out in Milwaukee. I mean, I was over the moon, and then the Boston series last year, as frustrating as it was that we couldn't pull it out, I mean, there was a lot of hope there too. So to finally sort of get over this huge hump, and like you guys said, sort of shedding this a little bit, I would say, of this moniker that they can't do it in the playoffs. You know, Giannis needs to prove it. I mean, I think that stuff's certainly going to be here going into the second round. But you know, I guess for me, it really felt like at this time, at least, I can really just enjoy the moment of them finally getting rid of this super awful, annoying playoff streak that they've had for years. And I guess depressingly, the Pistons streak continues as the longest playoff losing streak, 14 games now in NBA history. So tough look for the Pistons, Riley?
Yeah, no, I would agree. And I think the beauty on top of everything else, the fact that they're able to, as you said, proverbially get the monkey off their back, is that they did it in such dominating fashion. Like, we'll talk a little bit about our upcoming opponents in the Celtics, but the fact that of pretty much any sort of playoff series, the Bucks have by far been the most dominant. Like, I don't know, there was a couple of moments where the Pistons were sort of competitive and they even had the lead going into half. I think it was just game 3, where it was like, okay, I mean, it's not going to be totally a cakewalk, but even by the end, they just kind of pulled it out, and there was never any sort of doubt where I was like, oh, I don't know, like they don't look all that great. Like there wasn't really a moment besides when Giannis was sort of struggling, but even then, other guys stepped up. So to not only get over the hump, even though I think we've discussed previously that none of us are really believers in like, oh, if you haven't done it in the playoffs yet, if you haven't won, then you're never going to win. But to kind of blow that out of the water and then do it in such dominating fashion is just, it's a cherry on top.
Yeah, and Kyle, I think beyond just the Bucks dominating as a team as a whole, which has, you know, obviously been their trademark all season long, I think I can't think of a more satisfying way for this series to end heading into the long break here than Giannis sort of shaking off that weird off-kilter Game 3 performance and putting up a career playoff high 41 points and doing it in the absolutely most, you know, traditional dominating way possible that you think for him, just attacking the rim relentlessly over and over. I mean, it seems like that is just an excellent narrative to have going into this break as we break this eventual Boston Bucks playoff series to death over the next few days.
Yeah, and I think it was kind of a little bit concerning, especially in the first half when he was struggling from the free throw line, and well, everyone on the Bucks was struggling from the free throw line. And it was kind of one of those where, you know, Detroit, it was going to be, were they going to put up a fight or were they going to just roll over? And they put up a fight, and they put up a hell of a fight in that first half. And it seems like every time Milwaukee was able to get a basket, Detroit would hit a three. And the math was not on Milwaukee's side for the majority of the game. But, you know, Giannis kind of highlighted it, just kept attacking the rim and attacking the rim and attacking the rim and putting up a ridiculous circuit shot, which I still couldn't believe he hit. And it just forced, you know, Detroit to, they had to choose whether you follow him and take your chances, but everyone was starting to get into high foul trouble and Blake Griffin fouling out, or you just put up weak defense around him and he was able to get whatever he wanted at the rim. So it was also fitting because, you know, there's this whole Giannis didn't win a playoff series. And, you know, to go out on the road, score 41 points, have a couple highlight plays, just doing it on both ends of the floor. You know, in the first half, he couldn't get anything going offensively, but defensively, he was still a menace. And then, you know, vice versa in the second half. And it is pretty fitting. And I feel like this is Giannis in a nutshell, is he's going to force anything at the rim. He's going to do whatever he wants, and you can't really stop him. Your only hope is that he continues, like, goes cold from the free throw line.
Yeah, just underscoring that fact. I mean, 28 for 34 were the Bucks tonight at the rim. That's just absolutely insane, and that's been something the Pistons haven't been able to stop them at all in that area, close proximity to the basket this whole series. And I mean, that's really where the Bucks wanted tonight. The Pistons were shooting pretty well, 13 for 34 from three. That's 38.2%. That's really what kept them in the game. It seemed like to me, Riley was the hot shooting, at least for a little while.
Yeah, and even when, like, in the third quarter, like Kyle's just saying, like, again, I think we have to kind of go back and circle Giannis, because this was definitely, like, if there was such a game here throughout the series that was his coming out party, it was definitely that. And it falls on him in, like, the third quarter when Reggie Jackson, of all people, is, like, going hot, getting really hot from three. And it just seems like every time I looked up, Kevin Harlan was losing his mind over some sort of Detroit basket, and then immediately would be like, and there comes Giannis on the other end, they're just going right through people. And then when Giannis was out, like, again, this is another game where he doesn't have to play all that many minutes. Like throughout the entire series, he only got 32 minutes tonight. And the fact that you're able to fall back, and here comes Chris Middleton, Eric Bledsoe. And I think this was another great game for like Eric Bledsoe, for example, where he comes out and he does exactly what he's done all season long. Chris Middleton kind of similar, like he's just doing his like occasional post-ups, occasional mid-rangers, but also doing a couple threes here or there. And I think it was a microcosm of the season, maybe a little bit more so just because, you know, Giannis put the team offensively on his back for that long stretch and really kind of put the game away. But what was most remarkable was how unremarkable the game was, just because we've seen this happen so many times throughout the season. And the fact that it sustains even in the higher intensity of playoffs, even when the Pistons got somebody like Blake Griffin back, it's just they had no answers. And that's both maybe a little bit of indictment of how big of a hole Detroit is in, but also just a big credit to the Bucks, the fact that the system and the team works so well that even when you get into more serious competition, you don't have to do anything different. You just rely on the things that got you there, and here you are going on to the second round.
Yeah, and I mean, Kyle, I mean, Eric Bledsoe, I think, had a picturesque Eric Bledsoe game, 7 for 12 from the field, 16 points, 5 assists, 2 steals. And really, it was him and Middleton was doing work in that third quarter, but it was really Bledsoe just picking his spots, taking apart the Detroit defense whenever he wanted. I mean, his ability, that he had that one play in transition where he got in transition. Blake Griffin was like sort of trailing behind him, and you could see Blake maybe could have tried and gone up and contested him, but Bledsoe is just able to use his outstanding lower body strength and shield him off and get another finish at the rim. He only had 1 free throw attempt on the night, and you could see that improving in the rounds ahead. But I also want to highlight Sterling Brown. I mean, this guy, for the whole series, and I mean, particularly tonight, we talked about his 7 assist game last week. I mean, tonight he leads the Bucks in terms of assists for the game, 6 assists, and he also leads them in rebounds. I mean, Kyle, I don't think you can say enough about how Sterling Brown and George Hill and you know, Nikola Mirotic played well tonight, are just sort of filling in the fringes of this Bucks rotation in a much more meaningful way than what we saw last year.
Yeah, and especially, I mean, the depth. I know I've been talking about it in the past, but the depth of this team is just fantastic. You know, you're losing players, and you can have Sterling Brown coming in the starting lineup, and he plays really, really well, and he's really turned it around since that Atlanta game. And George Hill deserves a great shout out. You know, he, at the end of the first quarter, he hits a 3 when Milwaukee couldn't get anything going offensively, gets that steal, gets the 2 free throws, gets the game within 2. You know, it's just plays like those where it kind of just exemplifies George Hill as that guy. You know, he can come off the bench, he's that steadying presence, and he can come up big when needed, just like in that Philadelphia game. Mirotic is back hitting shots. I know after game 1 we were kind of talking about let him get these bad shots out of the way and misses out of the way now, so that way when it gets to the next round, he's ready to go. And I think he's getting there. I don't think he's 100%, but he looks a lot better, especially in the last 2 games. And you know, that's just what the team is. And even someone like Pat Connaughton, who defensively might give you, he's going to take those gambles and it's going to pay off. And so I think the depth is really huge. And in terms of Eric Bledsoe, it was really, you can kind of tell in that fourth quarter, he knew Detroit was in foul trouble, and that's when he decided to pick his spots and attack the rim, because he didn't do it much in the first half. And you know, Middleton was kind of the same way. It was like those two didn't really get anything in the first half, and then the second half it was, you know, Middleton gets a pull up 3. He's, you know, the team's feeling good, he's feeling good. Bledsoe realizes if they foul him, they're going to foul out, or it's more free throws, and he decides that's what I'm going to attack. And it just looked like the Bucks knew when to pick their spots, and when, you know, they kept playing their game offensively, while defensively they kind of made some changes. So I was impressed by the team overall, especially considering each of the 4 games were kind of different. The first game, Milwaukee just shut out the gate and didn't look back, and then the second game, it was, you know, the first half they kind of struggled, and then turned it around and got that going. And game 3, Blake Griffin comes in. Giannis has a poor game, still win by 13 points, 13 or 16. And in game 4, it really was, you know, they couldn't get anything going offensively. They couldn't get any threes, but they just stuck to their game and was able to just get a basket and a few things going their way and get a couple of timely plays. And that just shows that they were the better team. Now, they can't play like they did in game 4 against Boston and expect it to be easier, but it is encouraging that I think this was, for those that were concerned that they're going to coast through and they might not be ready for Boston, I think this was a good wake-up call / you know, warm up for them.
Yeah, I was actually going to bring that up because I know you had mentioned earlier, Riley, you thought it was a probably a boon for this team that they didn't feel like they had to really make any drastic adjustments mid-series. And yeah, it's probably a good thing they dominated to that level. But do you think there's any sort of drawback to the fact that, I would say I mean, at least from some of the national people that I've heard, their primary criticism against Bud has been sort of his inability to make adjustments in series. Is there any sort of drawback to the fact that the Bucks weren't really faced with that type of scenario that much this series, or do you think that's just something that was just a matter of the difference level in terms of talent on both these teams?
Well, I think maybe it's probably the talent level, but I mean, nobody was able to really force the Bucks to have to adjust in any sort of meaningful way throughout the entire season. Like we've yet to really run across a team that had a game plan that was like, wow, that's like really effective, and wow, the Bucks really have to think about changing something. Like that's a gigantic flaw. Like that, the go-to like criticism was like, well, if Giannis doesn't have a jumper, which like has been the old hat argument for years now. So, yes, it's an indictment of the difference in talents between the Bucks and the Pistons, but even then, it's throughout the entire season, like in the 3 games that the Bucks played Boston, like the one loss was like a pretty bad shooting night for the Bucks, and it was a really good shooting night for the Celtics. And then that's pretty much like the tail of the tape for any sort of game. So I'm not sure even how many gigantic adjustments the Bucks will even need to make, because they haven't had to throughout the entire season. It's worked perfectly. Now, and even if we had, or even if the Bucks had been forced to make adjustments, I mean, I don't see that as like Coach Bud needs to have reps adjusting on the fly to like be more comfortable with it. Like he either has it or he doesn't. And I'm not sure if, having to adjust slightly in game 3 was going to be the big differentiator, whether or not he was going to be able to step up in the second round against Brad Stevens, for example. So I don't take away too much from it. I think it's, again, just all credit to him for having such a dominant system. And we'll see once things kind of get tighter over the course of a series. But even going in against Boston, like obviously the talent level is a lot higher, but they're still missing guys like Marcus Smart, and they're still relying on pretty much a 7-man rotation to get them through. So they don't have nearly as many guys like last season when Marcus Smart returned. That was like a decisive factor for them to kind of swing the series back to the Celtics. And we'll see what his health status is moving forward. But you're not going to have to deal with a team where, if for whatever reason Brad Stevens makes a slight adjustment, or like he can pull some guy off the bench and maybe insert him. Like I think the odds that they're going to have to adjust radically probably aren't that high. And so I'm not too worried that they didn't have to do it in the first round either.
That's totally fair. And yeah, I think this is a great time to pivot, obviously, to look a lot more at Boston. Obviously, the enjoyable win against the Pistons, but this team clearly has higher aspirations. So let's just look back at a couple of those contests that they had. So like Riley alluded to, they tipped off their first game was in November, that 117-113 loss that the Bucks had at their hands. Of course, if you haven't heard, that was the game where Al Horford hit a bunch of pick and pops. I feel like that's been basically the game that people have pointed to this whole season, and still like sort of thought that that's the reason why the Bucks defense won't work, even though they, were pretty much fine the whole rest of the year and faced other teams that had pick and pop bigs. But anyway, in December, the Bucks won. The Bucks won 120-107. That game, the Celtics didn't have Al Horford. And then February 21st, the first game out of the All-Star break, not close, narrow 98-97 win for Milwaukee. Really, really strong game there. The Bucks pull it out late. And, the Celtics have Al Horford and Kyrie Irving going 37 and 41 minutes respectively. You could tell that they wanted that one, and the Bucks were still able to take it on their home court. So those were some impressive wins. But, I think Riley makes a smart point that teams, and it's something I've been thinking about a lot about, as teams, and some people seem to talk a little bit more about what's going to happen if people play Brook Lopez off the floor. And Kyle, I just don't. I'm waiting to see the scenario where it even can happen, where a team would be able to get Brook Lopez off the floor, because to this point, it doesn't really feel like we've seen it, even in that first Boston game, where it really took a heroic shooting effort from them for them to be able to fell the Bucks.
Right. And I don't think Brook Lopez is going to get shot off the floor. Al Horford is going to pick and pop, and it's not like he's going to turn into when Joel Embiid plays the Bucks and just fire up 13 something threes. I think Budenholzer is also going to note that it's going to happen. It might, and depending on how they do the pick and roll, maybe they just switch it if it's like a 4-5 pick and roll, or depending on with Giannis or with Bledsoe, how that's going to go, because I'm sure they're going to do a lot of Kyrie Horford type of things. But I think it's just going to be adjustments that Budenholzer makes. Like you said, the first game it took Boston hitting a record amount of threes, but then again in that third game it took a couple of questionable calls going both ways for that game to end. So it's going to be interesting. It's going to look more like the first game, whether it's the Bucks or the Celtics hitting a rare amount of threes, or if it's going to be the third game, which is going to be more of a slugfest, or if it's going to be the second game, even though the Celtics were kind of shorthanded, Milwaukee kind of handily won that game. So I think it's going to be kind of more of a combo of that second and third game because I just don't see Boston shooting that well again. And I don't see, because I mean, even there are guys that were hitting shots that are not good shooters. So I think it's going to be more of a kind of the second or third game style, but it's going to be interesting to say the least, just because I think last year, if Eric Bledsoe was half decent, or if Joe Prunty wasn't the coach, or if you don't have Jabari Parker and Shabazz Muhammad and Jason Terry played 20 something minutes in a game seven, Milwaukee wins that series. And now you come back with a better team and a better coach, while the Celtics haven't really improved from last year. And if anything, they've kind of stagnated or gotten worse. I think that's going to play into Milwaukee's hands more favorably.
Yeah, and of course they're coming off the sweep themselves of the Indiana Pacers. The is, oh yeah, you
Great
heard our
series.
thoughts. You heard our thoughts about watching those games. Yeah,
So exciting.
I love Bojan Bogdanovic, primary offensive initiator. Okay, so I just looked
Face
at
the
some
floor,
of
ISO Bojan.
it was
Honestly, the fact that the Pacers didn't fall any lower without Oladipo was kind of shocking.
yeah,
I know
it's
they were the third
crazy.
seed when he got hurt, and they only fell to the fifth seed. That's ridiculous and kind of
And
impressive.
well, they were only, and I mean, if you look at the stats, like their net rating was only 0.2 during that time, which is like, it's basically like playing like a 500 team. So it's essentially like the Boston Celtics were facing the Detroit Pistons. So, and that's something I actually wanted to talk about here is that, so you're looking at the opponents that both of these two teams faced, trying to figure out if we really learned anything from these series. I guess I'm prone to think that I learned almost nothing new about the Bucks, and I don't really know if we learned anything new about the Celtics from this series. Do you think, Riley?
No, not really. I think the only thing you could really probably point to would be like Gordon Hayward kind of seeming to sort of kind of come together for at least a game. Like I think his game four performance, he was like the key guy, but otherwise, even like game three, he played 32 minutes, had 2 for 7 from the floor and only 6 points. Like it's I think Kyle's point is correct that this is going to be a different Celtics team because obviously they didn't have Kyrie and they didn't have Hayward during the series last year, and they didn't have Smart for part of it as well. So that'll be kind of a different look there. But otherwise, I mean, none of the games were super remarkable. Like that first game was super typical early matinee, like NBA playoff game, totally sloppy on both ends, just an eyesore offensively. And I'm not sure if there was anything besides like, I don't know, didn't somebody tweet out that Kyrie Irving has the highest winning percentage as a player in like postseason history or something like that. But otherwise, I don't know. I'm pretty confident that the Celtics team that you saw during the season isn't radically different. Like maybe, obviously Kyrie is a lot more reliable now or is playing at a higher level now than he was during the regular season where he was still even pretty remarkable there. But otherwise, I'm not sure if there was something you take away from the Pistons series, or not the Pistons, the Pacers series. Like, oh my God, we have to watch Al Horford. He's pick and pop, and he's so hot right now. So I didn't really see it. And I guess, and I don't know, they're a weird team in that any of their guys could potentially play well, but they have like too many horses at the trough kind of situation. So they're an interesting team. I'm curious how they're going to be able to perform once you're raise the competition against them, where it's not nearly as easy to kind of dole things out because your opponent isn't. It's like you said, very much like the Bucks series here, where it wasn't all that much of a test just because the opponent wasn't all that great, and that's not Indiana's fault. They're missing Oladipo, but I'm not sure there was much you could take away and say, oh, this is a decisive thing that they're going to ride from here on out.
I think it's so funny too that you bring that up, Riley. The idea that there's too many horses at the trough, because I mean you could say same thing that there's too many Bucks at the trough, but like it just seems like the mentality of the Bucks players maybe versus the Celtics players. I mean, you have guys like seemingly just like a guy like Terry Rozier seems like a guy who he like really wants minutes. He like needs to be out there. He's like clearly up and down. And then you look up and down the Bucks roster. It's like, I mean, George Hill could probably, he's been playing, he's been getting pretty steady minutes, but it's like Tony Snell doesn't really even play. Like DJ Wilson could probably give some like decent minutes that they have like Marcus Morris doing something for them. It just feels like the ethos of this Bucks team, Kyle. I mean, I think they're honestly just as deep as Boston, but it feels like there's more of like a collective team mentality to them as opposed to the drama filled season that this Celtics have gone through.
I think Kyle agrees.
No, yeah. So I definitely agree that Milwaukee is as deep as Boston. I think the only reason why Boston kind of gets more of the hype is because, there are a lot of guys, there are a lot of big names that people know. You have like Gordon Hayward and Kyrie, and then last year you had Jason Tatum and Jalen Brown kind of break through, and then you had Terry Rozier have a breakout series. And it's kind of just a lot of guys that people know, whether they've just been around the league long enough or if it's just because, it's Boston. So, of course, everyone makes it seem like it's a bigger deal. But this was the same team that should have won 60 games and couldn't. And there's no excuses. It's not like they had that bad of injuries. It's not like they were, just having a poor stretch. They just were not living up to expectations. So, I think, and a lot of the times when the Celtics had their issues, it was always after some kind of loss. I think that even after the loss at home against Milwaukee, they had a team meeting. And it's kind of one of those where are they going to mentally be able to keep it together for a 7-game series in which things are not going to go well and they're going to lose a game and they're going to struggle. And that's when it's going to be really curious to see how that goes compared to Milwaukee, where the Bucks have a better team chemistry and better team spirit. If things don't go well, then it's fine. They're gonna work hard and try and fix those mistakes. While with Boston, it's gonna be kind of just like a mess and kind of some kind of soap opera. So I think that's going to be the key difference. And Milwaukee's depth is only going to get better when they have a healthy Brogdon. Even if they bring him off the bench, he's still going to be another player that has shown that he can perform in the playoffs compared to Boston, where it's like, yeah, you have a couple guys that can do it. But in the end, are you really hoping that Al Horford and Aaron Baines are available for them to have a chance? That's kind of an issue.
Well, and I was going to say, it's not even just like there's all that. I would tend to think that, yes, they had a tough season, but they've kind of put it together near the end of the season. They even ended the year like top 10 in both offensive and defensive rating, like just barely, but they made it. And they do have the top line talent, but I think the main difference, not only is it that the Bucks now have a coaching staff, like a legit coaching staff that's not interim or just kind of putting together on the fly, but it's like the top end talent. We have Giannis, but like a whole nother year of seasoning and kind of perfecting his game and being within the system that typifies everything he does well. But then you also have, you're not going to have probably the human torch Chris Middleton that you did a year ago, but you have somebody who fits more within the system and isn't being called upon the entire game to like help carry the offensive load. You have an Eric Bledsoe who's probably a lot more comfortable with this within the system and looking forward to a chance to redeem himself from a year ago. And then once you move past that, it's not even like the depth where guys 10, 11, 12 are of a higher talent level, but like, 7, 8, 9, those kind of guys who are going to probably get like 10, 12 minutes. The ability of those guys is so much better than it was a year ago that it's almost laughable when you think about it. And the fact that John Horst went ahead and brought all these guys in that, and we've talked about throughout the entire season, but the fact that they fit so perfectly, like each and every one of them has a role to fulfill within the system on both ends of the floor. And it's not like, okay, well, we have Shabazz Muhammad and he's kind of like shot a lot of really good mid-rangers for whatever reason. So let's just keep riding that. Like you don't have to rely on that anymore. And I think that's going to probably be the differentiating factor that ends up putting the series to the Bucks. Though I do think it'll probably be a little bit more knockout drag out than the first round for either team, I should say.
So in my research, I saw that the one game that Aaron Baines played, it looked like the Bucks lost. So, Riley, any credence to the fact? Do you think like Giannis was just trying too hard to destroy him with a dunk? Like, do you think he was too focused on that?
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. That's a really good question. I hope that it seemed throughout the first series that Giannis took a lot of glee in destroying dudes the entire time. And it's not like, it wasn't like early season Giannis where he's still kind of like getting used to things or getting used to the system. Like he's a lot more comfortable with things and seems very much in the zone right now. Like even his minutes are down, but even his per 36 production is like way up. They're not way up, but like pretty up from even last year in the playoffs. So I'm not sure if it was a function of him focusing too much on getting the highlight dunk. I think that will come in time. So, and I believe he's got the the patience and the mindset to wait for the right opportunity to decimate Aaron Baines. And who knows if Aaron Baines is even going to get played all that much. But yeah, I don't know if that'll be something they'll be writing. Brad Stevens will write on the old the clipboard during a timeout, like, Aaron, kind of stand over here and look ready to receive a dunk. Like, we need that right now.
Well, I think that does actually play into something I wanted to talk about weirdly, which is the fact that last year Brad Stevens sort of seemed to employ this strategy that he was just going to let Giannis kind of get his and then have the other players try to beat him. And clearly that didn't work out for Eric Bledsoe, worked for Chris Middleton, and obviously worked out because the Bucks were a lot more talent deficient last year. I mean,
Jason Terry.
Jason Terry, Thon Maker was the swing guy, and you saw how he played tonight. He was good last year, but he's also Thon Maker. So
he's no longer on the team.
yeah, he's also no longer on the team. But I mean, like, you look at I was just looking at the stats. So like Giannis scored at least 30 in every single game against the Celtics this year, 30, 30, and 33. It was sort of a mixed bag for the rest of the starters. Brook Lopez actually had pretty quiet nights, 3 points, 2 points, and 10 points. So 10 points was the most that he scored against Boston all season long. So Kyle, do you think that Stevens is going to try and do sort of a similar thing this year, like just try and let Giannis get his and see if everyone else can stay home and shut down the rest of Milwaukee's players?
Well, whether Stevens wants to do it or not, it's going to happen.
I was going to say, he doesn't have much of a choice.
It's kind of like we can try. It's not going to work, but Giannis is going to get his. It's just a matter of, will someone else step up and help Giannis out? Will Bledsoe exercise those playoff demons? Will Chris Middleton continue being a flamethrower? Will there be a different bench player that kind of joins, whether it's George Hill or Nikola Mirotic or Pat Connaughton or Ursan? If there's someone else that kind of comes off the bench and is that spark plug, and if Brook Lopez is going to continue just doing what he does, like, those are, I think Stevens can try, but it's not going to matter. It's Giannis is going to get 30 something points and 14, 15 rebounds, 6, 7 assists maybe at most, and just have his way, whether they like it or not.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like the inefficiency that the Bucks haven't really had to explore yet is the fact that Giannis still continues to play so few minutes. I mean, Riley, imagine him. You were talking about his per 36 numbers being up. I mean, he could go up to 40 minutes probably pretty easily here, especially with the fact that you get at least 1 to 2 days rest between all of these games.
Yeah, I pray for whatever poor team has to deal with a fully unleashed 40-minute Giannis. We might not even see it still, just because if the games get out of hand, or it seems like Bud has been pretty on top of getting him his rest when he needs to. But yeah, it'll be interesting seeing which team is the first one. I think whoever is the first team that forces him to get a 40-minute game that's not an overtime game, they should get some sort of reward, like some sort of compensatory, like, you did it, you got Giannis to go above 35 minutes this game, congratulations. But I think the beauty of that is just because it'll be so tiring to have to play against that for a full 40 minutes. Like, it's one thing when he's having difficulty, like he's getting charges called against him, or like we said, like if you have guys who are able to wall him off. But he's, even just from a year ago, he's so much more seasoned and so much more crafty, and he seems to have a lot more of a grip or handle on how to be able to get his offensively without having a lot of the kind of not boneheaded, but kind of mistakes that we'd have. And he had some throughout the season, obviously, but I think it'll be difficult, especially for the Celtics, just because I think they only have 8 dudes have averaged more than 10 minutes a game. Like, you have Horford, you have Morris, you have I guess Hayward, and then maybe you could throw Tatum on him, but none of those guys really scare you, besides maybe Horford, just because he has the quote unquote veteran savvy as a paint defender. But none of those guys really scare you. He's a shutdown defender. Like, if Giannis is matched up against any of the guys, he'll go right through them. And then if they kind of have to continue to rotate and none of the guys can really get a handle on him, and then you have 40 minutes, you're like, wow, this sucks, like having to deal with this dude possession after possession. And then it's not only we all kind of collapse on him, but then he has all these other guys around him who can just make us pay for the fact that we have to try and stop him for 40 minutes. I think it'll be a nightmare scenario for any team. And it's not only Chustiatis, but even Eric or Chris or like any of the top line talent who haven't had to have much run at all. And I think the Celtics have had Kyrie's averaging like 38, 37 minutes a game. Like he's already had to ramp it up in the first round against the relatively lowly Pacers. So good luck to Boston. I'm sure it'll be a lot of fun for him.
Yeah, just a couple mismatch stats that I pulled here real quickly. So I was looking at some stuff. Obviously, the Bucks had plenty of free throws tonight. They ranked around middle of the pack in terms of free throw rate for this season. Actually, exactly middle of the pack, about 19.9 free throws per 100 field goal attempts. Boston is really low in that regard. They're 29th in the league, 17.3 free throws per 100 field goal attempts, which obviously sort of mitigates the Bucks' advantage there as the team that allows the least free throws against them. So that's kind of a disappointment there. But you also look at Boston. They're when you look at the transition game, which I think was obviously such a huge part of this Detroit series. You could see Giannis trying to attack whenever he had a chance. The Bucks, I believe, are run transition the fourth most frequent, and then Boston allows the least transition plays per game through this season. So it seems like some of these stats here are gonna be really interesting chess matches. And as much as I feel pretty confident in the Bucks being able to do this, I mean, Boston is a team that has, if you look across all of their stats, I mean, they rank really highly, even if they're not quite as high at the Bucks. I mean, they're top 10 for a lot of these types of things, and that was with a regular season that people said was pretty disjointed. So, I'm hesitant to really to write them, to I don't know. I'm a lot more. I feel a little more fearful, Kyle, of this series against Boston than maybe I do in the next round. Maybe that's just because I have no idea if we'll make it there or not. But I feel like I fear Boston most of all out of any of the Eastern Conference teams.
Nah.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, never mind.
I mean, Boston's going to present a tough challenge. I will acknowledge that. They're going to be. I think they're the second toughest team Milwaukee would potentially face in the Eastern Conference. I think Toronto's still their biggest threat just because they have more of those pieces that kind of match up with Milwaukee. While Boston, I mean, other than Kyrie Irving, don't have a player who position-wise is better than the Bucks counterpart. So I think that's going to be the difference. And again, I just don't think really what Boston is going to do. They're going to try and slow it down. They're going to, like you said, prevent Milwaukee from going in transition. However, it's just going to be one of those where if the Bucks can hit their shots, this game it's not going to be close. But I think the Celtics are going to be a tougher test. I think they have a coach that should.
Oh, you got dangerously close to saying that you thought Stevens was better than Bud, didn't you?
In terms of tactic, like in a tactic perspective, maybe, but Stevens should be a coach that makes the adjustments that are needed. He should be the coach that knows when to pick the moments of where to attack Milwaukee, which I don't think. I mean, Dwayne Casey didn't really have it, and I don't see any other coach in the Eastern Conference doing that. So that's the one thing where Boston does have the edge, is having a coach that can seem to pick their moments on how to attack Milwaukee, where to attack Milwaukee. It's going to be tough, but I still think the Bucks win it in 6, and if anything, I could see it going 5.
So the idea of Riley being like, "Wow, did you almost say that someone was better than Bud? That's sacrilege! How could you do that, Kyle?
How did this guy get on the podcast? What's happening here?
This is homers only." Yeah,
better
I guess
than players only. Slightly better than players only.
Everything is better than players only.
Yeah, this is true. Well, I'm trying to think. Okay, so you think that the only positional advantage they have is Kyrie over Eric Bledsoe? Is that what you were saying?
Yeah, and it's not like it's a large gap. It's 50-50. I would just say Kyrie's offense is that good that he himself can win a game for Boston. I can't say the same with Eric Bledsoe. Eric Bledsoe's defense can win a game for Milwaukee, but Kyrie's offense is, I think, just slightly better than Eric's defense.
I would say probably the other area weakness, and this is kind of dependent on when Malcolm's able to come back. But Sterling Brown, like you already went through it, Adam. Like he's had a great playoff so far, and he's definitely stepped up to the occasion of being within the starting lineup. But if he's still out there. Like I don't even know who Boston's really running out there for
I know.
their.
I was trying to look it up.
Yeah, I'm trying. I'm like looking through it right now.
Worth
It looks like Jaylen Brown is the guy that they're going with. So, I mean, I don't know how big of a drop off there is. I think there's probably a little bit of a drop off, especially on the offensive end. But even then, like maybe he's an area of concern. But I agree that there's probably like 1 through 5, and Al Horford versus Brooke Lopez is a little ambiguous just because they both kind of like they're both really important in their own unique ways. So that's kind of a toss up. But if you're like, I would agree generally down the line, like Chris Middleton's probably more reliable at this point than Gordon Hayward, even if their top level games may not match up necessarily. But Eric Bledsoe's not super duper far down from Kyrie. Like obviously Kyrie's an awesome offensive player, but we'll have to see how that works out. And then Giannis is obviously there's nobody you can kind of compare to Giannis. So I would broadly agree with Kyle's point, though. I agree that it'll probably be a lot closer in terms of talent than the first series was.
Yeah, and I think we need to talk about a bit of the backup power forward rotation, because that's certainly something. I mean, Brook, he plays around 30 minutes a game. Maybe they'll ramp that up, a little bit more here in the Boston series, as long as he seems to be having success. But I mean, if the Bucks do have to go to a switching defense, I think Brook Lopez had pretty decent success when they went to the switching defense a couple times this season. I mean, he was able to guard guards with an impressive ability with his, ballet feet. But I think we need to talk a little bit about Nikola Mirotic and Ersan Ilyasova. And I especially want to focus in on Mirotic. Kyle, it had to be heartening to see him, for me it was personally at least, to see him finally knock down some shots. Because I think that there's just like an offensive upside to him that remains untapped, that I think the Bucks are absolutely going to need going into the latter rounds with the sort of serviceable defense that he can present as well on the other end.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be something. And game 1 he comes back, doesn't really get any shots going, but this game and game 3 he seems to have found his rhythm, and he's going to be kind of a difference maker if he can come in for you kind of run him out, see if he can get anything going. If he hits a couple shots, great. If he doesn't, then okay, you go with Ersan and DJ Wilson as your other options. So I think that's going to be the important part, is if Mirotic can hit his shots, that's someone that, he just needs to come off the bench, hit 2 or 3 threes, and if he can do that, that's a win for Milwaukee.
Yeah, Kyle, is there anyone else? Do you think I'm curious what you think about Pat Connaughton. Like, do you think he's going to still get as much run as he's got in this Detroit series?
I think so, just because I don't know how up to speed Brogdon is going to be. Because it's a lot tougher because it's a foot, so you don't know like conditioning and everything else where he's at. So I think Connaughton will still get a run. He, offensively has shown that he should be out on the court. Defensively, he's been kind of a mixed bag where he's kind of gambling on stuff, but also is getting a couple blocks. And he had that timely steal, which I think was the key turning point of that game. So he's going to still get a run out. And until Brogdon is 100% healthy or can show that he is, able to handle playoff intensity minutes, I think Connaughton will still get a run.
Yeah, I was gonna say it would be pretty weird because I think he's averaging like 28.7 minutes a game. Like that would be obviously Malcolm's gonna soak up some minutes, but because he's playing so,
it's going to be a blowout.
Yeah, you would assume that's true. Well, maybe they will. Maybe that'll be that's a hint for my prediction. But I think I would agree with your point, Kyle, that it's really dependent. Like part of the luxury of Connaughton playing relatively well and not being like, a clear negative when he's out on the court is the fact that you can kind of ease Brogdon back into it. So, and I think that's probably the way that Bud will probably go about it. So I agree that I would assume that the rotation stays relatively stable now. And, who knows if you even need to rush Malcolm back. It kind of depends on how the games go.
Yeah, and I'd like to do one quick shout out. I forgot this. In that first Milwaukee loss that they had to Boston to start the year, the guy who had the by far best plus minus for the game, Dante DiVincenzo, Lord and Savior of the Brew Podcast, plus 16 for the day. Next closest guy was Tony Snell at +4. So Giannis was -4. So clearly that day, Dante was better than Giannis. That is what the numbers say.
And that way, do we have to do the Dante's Inferno
no.
right now?
No, I don't want to take the time to put the bumper in. All right, let's see. Well, anything else you guys want to say about this Boston series? I guess before we get to predictions, Kyle, you kind of made yours already, but we can lock it in here.
Yeah, Bucks in 6. Let's do this.
Okay. All right. Well, all right. So Kyle's got Bucks in 6. Any like sort of main points for why you think that's going to be the way it goes?
I think Boston will steal a game in Milwaukee. I, however, think Milwaukee has a better team. Milwaukee has a better coach than last year. Milwaukee has better depth than last year. And Eric Bledsoe is going to go on a redemption path. And I will talk about it more later this week in a potential piece.
Ooh, the
Jeez.
team.
Wow. I didn't even know about that.
Oh, I just thought of it like 5 minutes ago. I just threw it in the editor, so don't worry.
I'm going to be super obnoxious and say the Bucks sweep the Celtics. And my reasoning is I am not going to fall for the trap, even though I kind of already talked about it earlier, that I'm supposed to believe the Celtics suddenly woke up and are a totally different team, because we saw everybody here and everybody across, the nation around the world saw that first game against the Pacers. And that game, that Celtics team, those are the Celtics are going to be seeing in this series. So I'm not worried about it at all. I think the Bucks are going to smack them every single game out. I'm just it was such a ho-hum first series, and the Bucks have yet to be like at all challenged, or like they've yet to even have to like turn it on at all to win games easily. So I expect the Bucks to go in with a little bit of vengeance in their hearts, some happiness, and some glee at getting a chance to go into the TD Garden or whatever the hell they call it in Boston, and just tearing them apart on national TV in front of a stunned Boston crowd. So I expect the Bucks to sweep them in this series.
All right, low expectations for Riley, and I am gonna go Bucks in 7. I don't really buy into whatever the Celtics were doing against the Pacers. Like, if your main offense is like Tyreek Evans doing some crazy crap, Wesley Matthews picked up off the garbage heap, and Bojan Bogdanovic, doesn't mean I'm going to buy into it, but I do think that they present some interesting matchup issues for this Bucks team. I think there's a possibility of some really weird variant stuff happening here. I just think that sometimes that's what can happen in the playoffs in a short series where you're playing each other over and over. And I also think this Bucks team will be better for it if they emerge in this seven games. They are absolutely formidable at home. I think Boston might steal one on the Bucks home court, but I think the Bucks will be able to steal one in Boston and close it out in Milwaukee in Game 7. And I think that'll put them in a good position to have had a sort of a battle test here as they try and head into the Eastern Conference Finals for presumably a death match with either Toronto or Philadelphia. So the Bucks in 7 is my prediction. All right, guys. Well,
woo! Yeah, again, we should say that it is exciting. Again, reiterate the fact that it's exciting. The Bucks were able to get past their first round in almost 20 years, but it was such a decimation that, as exciting as it is and as awesome as it is, we have the rest of the week now to kind of sit back and relax before the series starts, and we'll probably be more excited by the time we record the next one, whenever the first game is, and we have some more stuff to talk about. But congrats to the Bucks. Thank goodness, awesome season. Getting through the first round for the first time forever is an awesome accomplishment, and I'm looking forward to what comes next.
Yeah, anything else, Kyle, from you?
Oh, the hype train still going strong. Don't worry.
All right. Let's end it on that. Congrats to the Milwaukee Bucks and Giannis Antetokounmpo and every fan out there. I hope you get to revel in this win this week. Whether it was a sweep, whoever they were facing. I mean, the fact that we absolutely just schmacked this Pistons team in every single way possible, didn't let them really think that they would even compete in the series, besides for maybe a half or two. And now we get to just enjoy the fact that we've gotten past the first round, and people can break down this Boston series to death over and over, thinking about the fact that Giannis will destroy them in the paint for the next few days. Let that sink in. I hope it gives you sweet dreams for these next few days, and we will talk to you again next time.